Well, hello and welcome again to our skateboarding site. We are working now on the second part, which involves styling with CSS. So first of all, let's recap where we left off, building the HTML for this site. We created a quick 3-page site, and let's just take a quick view in the browser of how we finished off, because that's going to be our starting point. We have a home page. And of course, there's no styling, so it looks very vanilla flavored. We have a little navigation bar. Our second page was the boards page, where we're actually showing a couple of skateboards for sale and their details. Again, not very well formatted. And then finally, a contact page with some basic contact information for the company. So let's see how that compares to where we hope to finish off. I have that version in the browser here. As you can see, it looks a lot nicer. This is the home page we're looking at here. We have a navigation bar now that looks a little better. We have kind of a 2-column layout. We've got some color, some fonts, some backgrounds. Here's our contact page. And a much nicer looking site, much more professional, much more engaging, much prettier to the eyes. So that's what we're going to be working on in this video, trying to take that vanilla flavored site and styling it up using Dreamweaver to get those styles in place. So without further ado, let's launch Dreamweaver. Again, this is the 2017 release of Dreamweaver CC that we're using. And step one, as usual, will be to define our site. If you went through the first video with me, you may already have your site defined and you can just continue on where you left off, but I will start over on the site definition. Site name, I'm going to call it Boards CSS. Doesn't matter what you call it, but I am going to point importantly to wherever those files are, wherever the outside main folder is, and then we'll, as usual, also add into that the local info of our images folder. And save. So let's go ahead and open our home page, and we'll start working on some of the CSS there. First of all, we need to recall some of the structure that we set up in the previous video, and quickly going through that. We're currently in design view, by the way, using the standard workspace, and we have the property inspector docked at the bottom here as we did before. This initial start is a header. We're pointing out the HTML because it factors into the CSS, so we need to be familiar with it. The navigation bar below that is a nav. The rest of the page content is housed in a div with an ID of main. You can see it highlighted there. And then at the bottom of each page, there's a copyright area inside of a footer. So that's the structure that we're working with on each of these pages. The boards page is a little bit more complicated with its content in the main area, and we'll have to focus more attention on it. And the contact page is the simplest of the three. But we'll start with the home page and begin by working a little bit more in live view than we did in the previous video, and that's because live view shows us some of these styles more accurately than does design view, and so we'll bounce back and forth as needed, but we'll spend more time in live view here. We're going to begin with a basic style on the body. Now notice in the tag selector here, the body is the surrounding tag for the whole page. So if you want some style to take effect across the entire page, the body is the one to do it with. We're going to be using the CSS Designer panel and the Files panel, but mostly the CSS Designer panel. So we'll be bouncing back and forth between these two as needed. But when we're creating styles, we're really going to be focusing a lot of attention on this CSS Designer panel. And you want to make sure that your workspace is wide enough here where the CSS Designer breaks into two columns, and we'll need to use both. So if necessary, you may have to move this as needed depending on your screen width to get those two columns for the CSS Designer. So let's begin with the concept of creating a style on the body. Now whenever you want to create styles for a page, it's best if those styles are going to be going into an external style sheet, a separate file dedicated to these styles, where they can then be applied to other pages so that we don't have to individually style each page. We can create styles that'll work for the whole site. So to do that, we're going to click a plus sign here on the sources because we currently don't have any sources for our CSS. We're going to create a new CSS file as our source, and we get prompted for what to call it and where to put it. And if we just come up with some kind of basic name like styles, that will work fine. You could browse to a particular folder, but not necessary here. We're just going to click OK. It's going to put that file in our main root folder, so that's fine. If we had a separate CSS folder to put style sheets into, that would be an OK place to put it as well. So it creates this file. It's currently blank as far as styles that it contains. The media that we're going to use is always going to be global for this site. We'll get into more media related styles in another video. And then selectors, to create a style or a format, you need a selector which indicates what part of the page you are going to be formatting, and then the properties on the right hand side here are the actual formatting that you want to apply, such as a color or a font. So it helps to kind of have the part of the page selected, as we do with the body here, so that when you click the plus sign on the selector, Dreamweaver will automatically take a guess at what you're trying to style. In this case it says body P, thinking that I might want to style a paragraph within the body because I've selected paragraphs here. It's wrong, and I need to back that off and just go for body. You can use the plus and minus, or I'm sorry, the up and down keys to get more or less specific, but neither of those really gives me what I want. So I'm going to go in there and manually delete out that P so I just have body. When you have body, you hit enter, it locks that selector into place, and it activates the properties for you to go ahead and set some formatting. My main interest here in the body is to give a background color, but we have also have some basic margining to do. So the properties, by the way, make sure show set is off. If it's on, it only shows you the properties that you've previously set, and we haven't set any, so it's blank, and it doesn't give you access to the properties you may want to set. So we're going to click that off. It's good to click it on when you've got a bunch of styles and you want to interrogate what is on what. You can just see the ones that have been set. Here we're interested in setting some, so we're going to turn that off. We're going to click on one of these categories normally. There's quite a lot of CSS styles, and you can scroll through, but it's quite a bit to try to find something when you're first starting out. So it's best to get used to these categories, which limit it what you'll see on the right hand side to layout related styles, text related styles, border related styles, background related styles, and then just kind of an other category where some other oddball styles are kept. So we're interested first of all in setting a background, so I'm going to choose that category. Here it is, and we can either set a background file like an image background or a color. In this case we're going to choose a color. That color is going to be kind of a light gray blue. It's not critical that you pick the exact same one I do, but you want something in this range that I'm going for here. And notice this can get you darker and lighter. So we're going to go on the light side of the gray here. And when you get the color that you like showing up here, then you just hit enter, and it locks it in and it becomes live on the page. Again, we can go from design view to live view. It doesn't change too much because the styles we're doing here are quite basic. But when we get into more advanced styles, we'll need live. Okay, a couple other styles for the body. We do need to pay some attention to the margins. Browsers will give you a default margin around the content. We're not going to want much of a margin there, so we're going to set those for ourselves. So if we go to Layout in the Properties area, still on the body selector, we can set the margins. We want a 0 margin on the left, so I'm just going to hit 0, enter there. 0 on the right. You have to kind of click in where the existing 0 is kind of defaulted in there. Set that, and I'm going to set a 1 here on top, 1 pixel margin on the top. Very minor margins, trying to basically get rid of the margins that would normally be there. And that should really do it for the body. So now all we see basically is the background. And we'll move on to the next thing down, which is the header area. So the header area is what contains the complete Skateboard's logo, if you will. Doesn't look like much of a logo, but it'll look a little better later. And you can see the header is something I can select there down in the tag selector area and then create a style for it. So plus on the selector once the header is selected. And you see it says body header. We don't really need body in front of everything. Everything is inside the body. We know that. And it doesn't really help for body to be there. It just kind of complicates all the selectors. So I'll typically hit the up arrow key to just get body out of there and leave it as header. That'll do the job and then be clearer, and hit enter to lock that into place. And now we can set some styles on the header. The header is an area where I want that background to show up, that dark blue skateboard background that we saw earlier in the browser. So in order for that background to have enough space to fit into, I'm going to adjust the height, because otherwise this is just a skinny little paragraph there, not taking up enough space to fit a background into. So I'm going to create some height for it by clicking in on that height, choosing pixels as my units. I'm trying to match it up to the actual image's height that I already know, and 250 is what I want, so it's about 250 pixels high. I'm going to hit enter on that, and you can see that header area growing in size to match that setting. In addition to that, I would now like to set that background image in there, so I'm going to select the background category, and instead of background color, I'm going to go to background image here, and then I'm going to click the little browse for file, and it's the BG banner image that I'm interested in here. BG's for background. Have another BG for links, as we saw earlier. The navigation bar will use those. We'll OK that. And we see that image come in there. I need to make a couple of other settings. Let's see, for example, we probably should set this no repeat. This background repeat area, most images as a background will repeat if they're not as big as the background area they're trying to cover. They will repeat either horizontally and vertically, just horizontally, just vertically, or not at all. And we do not want this to repeat, so we're going to click on that setting there. And then lastly, we have one more background setting, and that's background size. So I click in there, and what we want is cover. Cover will help to cover the available space with that image so that there isn't any leftover space in that area. So there's our background. It's starting to look a little bit more like the original now with some of these initial formatting settings. Next, you'll notice that this paragraph that we had inside there is really almost unreadable now. It's the one that says complete skateboards, and we need to make that as you remember from the original in the browser, it was red and large and very visible. So what we want to do is kind of click in there and locate that paragraph and select that paragraph here. You should say header and then P, and then you're selecting that paragraph, and then we'll create a new selector for it. So we're going to format that paragraph, and we need again to use the up arrow so that it's just header P and not the body. Go ahead and hit enter on that, and then we'll set some styles for the text in the paragraph that's in the header. And for that, again, we want to set a bright red color so it stands out. So we're going to go up to the text category and set the color. That's the difference between a background color that we've been setting and a text color that we're about to set. I'm going to just kind of come over to this right corner here and get a bright red color, and then OK that. Again, not critical that you get the exact same color I do. Just try to get something that's bright red. You can see it now at least a little bit easier to see. I want it much bigger, so I'm going to now set the font size for it. Looking in font size, choosing pixels, and going 50 pixels. Hitting enter on that. You can see it's much more readable now. That said, when you have text against a background image that has varying contrast in it, it sometimes can help to set some text shadowing with a different color to set it off. So we're going to do that. Text shadowing you can see in this area here. There's several settings. It's not always obvious what those ought to be to get the effect you want. So I've kind of preset this out for us. We want 2 pixels for the horizontal shadowing. Tab down, and 3 pixels for the vertical shadow. 2 pixels for the blur. And then the color that we're going to choose is white. Basically, try to get it as light as possible. What that's going to do is set some white around the edges here so that it stands out a little bit more. Go ahead and hit enter when you get white, and then you can see the effect. That white shadowing kind of gives you a three-dimensional look, and it just kind of makes it stand out and pop from its background. All right, we have one other thing that we need to do here, and that's to get this to come down a bit. You may have also noticed that this kind of came down, the entire header kind of came down. It's unfortunate that it has that side effect, and it's a strange thing that fixes it here. I need to set a margin in order to fix that, so I'm going to go to the layout area and set a top margin, believe it or not, of 1, and see how that jumps back up there. It's kind of a strange side effect, but it is what it is. CSS had its oddities at times. We just have to deal with that one. We do want to move this down relative to the skateboard image and get it down in this area here, and there's a number of ways you could do that, but we're going to try padding top of 80. Padding is inside the object, so that's just going to kind of scoot the text down. Padding is also in this layout area right below the margin box is the padding box. We just want to set padding top, as I mentioned, setting that to about 80. It's going to move that down. You can see it moves it down to about the middle of that area, and that'll work for us in that position. That's pretty much the way it was in the browser earlier. So I think we're good to go now. If we want it a little bit off from the edge, then we could use text indent just as a nice touch. We'll go to the text category. Down towards the bottom there's text indent there, and it's just a matter of the number of pixels you wanted off from the edge to set that text indent. I'll choose 20 pixels. So you just get a little bit of a nice indentation. That's the end of our work with the header. Next, we're going to move down into the navigation area, and we're really going to use this navigation kind of as a left-hand column. So we're going to change the whole layout of this page from a single column as it stands currently, to a 2-column layout with the navigation along the left column and the rest of the content for each page on the right-hand larger column. To do that, we're going to need to float this set of links to the left and have the rest of the things, the rest of the content move to its right. So I'm going to click in that area there and use the tag selector to click on the nav itself. I need to set a width for the nav so it knows how much space along the left part of the page to reserve for it. So now that I have nav selected, again I'm going to use the plus sign on the selector. I see body nav. I want to use the up arrow key to get just nav. I want to hit enter on that, and then I can work on the properties of the navigation. Don't worry too much about the details of like which properties I'm setting, because it does take some experience and some experimentation to get this all right. And really what you should be focusing on is just the method of how you set these styles by selecting something and then getting the plus sign on the selector and moving into the properties. You can experiment around and eventually you'll learn more and more about the properties. But in Dreamweaver, the key here is just to be able to get a style sheet set up and get some selectors that work for your document over in this area here. Set whatever you can for it that works for you. Alright, continuing on. The nav needs a width of 300. We're going to go to the page layout group and find a width at the top there and set for pixels 300. And what you see as a reaction in live view here is just that kind of the container stops here at 300, and that's going to be the basically the width of our left-hand column eventually as we continue with this further. Next, I want to float it to the left, as I mentioned, and the floating capability is down below the margin and padding boxes there. There's float. You can float something to the left or to the right or not at all. The default is not at all. We're going to float it to the left. When we do that, we see some action taking place as it is moved to the left and it frees up space to its right for other stuff to come up. That's obviously not the look we're after exactly, but we're taking baby steps toward it here. Lastly, I want to move this navigation bar down a little bit. It's not clear why right now, but we'll see later. So I'm going to set margin top. I'm going to kind of go back up towards the margin settings. I want to set margin top for the nav to 50 pixels. And that just gives us some space here. Again, it'll become more obvious why that's helpful later. And that's really all we're going to do with the nav itself. Next, we're going to be doing some styles that affect the actual links in the nav, but just to the nav itself, that's all we're doing for now. The next bunch of settings, though, I need to do to this whole main area here, which extends from the welcome heading all the way down to the copyright area. So all of that basically, not including the copyright area actually. So to make that work, if we click anywhere in the main content and we look at the tag selector here, we already previously set up a div, if you recall, that kind of surrounds all of that main area. And you can see it selected there. It actually does not include the floated nav. I don't believe it does, but it looks like it does visually, but if you look at the code you can see that it won't. Anyway, that div we need to do some work on because we want to make sure that that's our right hand column. So with div main, notice we have a pound main on that, or a hashtag main. That's an ID that we can use in our selector to differentiate it from other divs. So I'm going to do a plus on the selectors for pound main, and you can see this time it, for whatever reason, it doesn't attach the body before it, which is nice, so we don't have to get rid of it. We can just hit enter and start creating styles for this main area. So for main, the big thing I need to do is set some padding to its left so that all of the main text will come back and form that second column. So I'm going to use padding for that and 300 pixels. Remember, 300 pixels is how wide we set the navigation, so we're setting padding of that same amount, 300, so that this main area, as you can see now, it has a nice edge at that 300 mark. You can see the grid here, and that's right where 300 is. So you can see how it's obeying our styles. And since the nav really wasn't part of that main div, it's right above it. If you look at code, you'll see it. Let's go to code just for a second. You can see the main being selected, and you can see that header and nav above it, and you can see the footer below it. So that's what main is. It's that area between the navigation and the footer. And let's go back to live view. So that's why it shifted, but the navigation didn't, which is perfect. That sets up these columns. Now we've got some work to do on these individual links before it will look like we saw it in the browser, and that's what we're going to do next. So let's go ahead at this point and click on one of these links. Any of them will do. You can go to the tag selector and just choose A. A is the HTML for a link. So you know you've got a link, and basically if we style one of these links, it will affect all three since they're all in the same area. And we're ready to click a plus sign for our selector, and it gives us nav PA as the selector, and that one's okay. There's no body that we need to worry about in front of it, and we're basically styling any links that are inside of a paragraph that are inside the nav, and that'll work for all three of our links. And it will differentiate from other links that could be in the main area, which won't be affected. So I'm going to hit enter, and that gives us any number of properties that we might want to play with here for these links. First of all, you may have noticed in the original final version that we had some skateboards that were backgrounds on those links, and that the links actually stacked on top of one another and not next to each other horizontally as we see here. So some of these changes will affect that. First of all, I'm going to set a width. The width in pixels will be 200. Remember, we're dealing with a 300 pixel wide 300 pixel wide left-hand column. So we're going to set each one of those links to be 200 pixels. It doesn't really react much yet, but that will help later. We're going to set a background image. We also want a height. Since we're here, we'll set that. We'll set the height to 60. And you'll notice those settings are because that's similar to the size of the skateboard background image that we're about to set. So I'm going to go to background, and I'm going to set that image in there. The background image we'll browse for. It's the BG Links image. It's not going to come in very well yet. In fact, it's barely even visible at all there. This will improve shortly. We want that link, that background not to repeat, so we're going to check the background repeat, no repeat setting there as we did before. And I'm going to set the line height to 60 pixels also. This will really help, I think, get a better look. Let's go line height. Line height is going to be in the text area. Here it is below the font related stuff. Pixels on line height and line height of 60. Here's where we're going to get them on one line each, and that's by floating each to the left. Float we do through the layout styles, and floats toward the bottom. Float left. Okay, as soon as we did that, a lot of the other styles kicked in. Clearly, the text of the links is way off to the left. So we need text align center. That's here. Text align left, center, right, and justify. And we want center. That, as you can see, brings them in. Background size contain. That's what's going to make these boards fit into the space that we provided. As you can see, they want to be much bigger than their space for. So we're going to go to the background category, and we're going to take background size and change that to contain. As you can see, it then tries to fit the space. It's kind of a fit to size of the element itself, much better. Now we're starting to get that look that we had in the original browser. Okay, and we need text decoration none to get rid of the underlining, because these are obviously links now and we don't need to advertise that with the underlining. So we go to the text group, we look for text decoration here, and we set it to none. And as you can see, since we're in live view, we're able to see all these styles. If we go to design view, you can see the problem here is this Dreamweaver's design view just isn't very sophisticated in terms of handling some of these advanced settings that we're doing here. You can see it doesn't render the text shadowing, it doesn't render out some of the more recent upgrades to CSS aren't handled very well. Live view handles them beautifully and really gives you a pretty good reliable way of seeing what your page will look like without needing to go to the browser all the time after each one of these settings. So it really saves you time here in the development stages. Okay, so to finish this off, I'd just like to change a font. We haven't really dealt much with fonts, and normally we would. I'm at least going to deal with them here and set a different font for our links. So I want to go to the text category and set a font family, and I'm going to set the first one in this list that does not end with serif. The first one is actually Gill Sans, so I'll choose that one. And you can see that gives us a pretty prominent looking link text, and I just want it to stand out from the rest of the text, and it certainly does, as does the main heading there. Okay, so I think we're done with our various settings on the links, and we've accomplished the goal of getting them to look, getting this whole area to look pretty much like we originally planned. And you can see one of the things that really stands out as not being right is the footer down here at the bottom, because it was not part of the original main area, and so it didn't get moved over at all, and it's also kind of close to the main content. So we're going to mess with the footer a little bit, jump down into that, click into the footer, choose footer as your tag in the tag selector, plus sign on the selectors, get rid of body now so that it's just footer, hit enter, and let's do some modification of the formats on the footer. So for the footer, first of all, I'd like a text align center. So let's choose the text group, text align and center. You can see that moves it over, and as the page in the browser is much wider, it will come across much more and look even better. My point here with the copyright or footer area normally is to de-emphasize it. So I typically want to kind of move it away from the main content and make it stand out less, maybe make the text smaller, or in this case not as bright, or not contrast as much as the main text. So to do that, I'm going to go to color, also in the text group, and I'm going to do something a little bit different just to show you what you can do with color. I'm going to choose the color sampler here. I'm going to come into my page and I'm going to select, and you really can select any color that you might already have set up, and you can see that the sampler works there. I'm just going to choose the background color here in this case. Obviously, if I actually choose a text color that equals the background color, it won't be visible at all. But I'm going to use this guy here to make it a little darker. So I'm staying in the same tone range. I'm making the text a little darker so it will stand out, but it's not going to be black. It's somewhere in between. I'm going to hit enter on that. It doesn't matter exactly what you get, but you want something that kind of doesn't stand out as much, and you can see I think I've accomplished that and de-emphasizes it. And the other way to de-emphasize would be to give it a top margin to move it down away from the content. So we'll do that with page layout related styles, and we'll scroll down in there to the margin top, and I'm going to set that at 35 pixels, and it's just going to move our footer down a little bit out of the way so it doesn't get confused with the main text. All right, well, we've handled a lot of the styles that we need, and it's time now to save. And when we save, we're going to save all, because we may be saving not only the page that we may have made some changes to, but also that style sheet, styles.css. If we look at our files panel now, we'll see styles.css is in our main site area. Now, I'm going to go to the browser to see how this looks, and you may be surprised by the other part of the site that we haven't paid any attention to yet. I'm going to go to Chrome now. The home page loads up, looks beautiful. You can see how that image really covers that whole area, and you can see how our copyright really does look de-emphasized down there, and you can see, whoops, our boards and our contact page have no style still. You may have thought that all of those changes I had been making would be applying to those other pages since they're structured identically, but in fact no, and we'll see why. It's easy to fix that. Notice our fonts look a little different here in the browser than they did in Dreamweaver. Not exactly sure why that particular difference is in place, but that's pretty different looking, and that does happen at times. That's why we really do need to check how our page looks in an actual browser and not rely 100% on live view, but it does a pretty darn good job of most things. So now let's address this issue of the styles not affecting contact and boards. So I'm going to open both of those up, boards and contact. The easier of these two to deal with is contact. It's such a basic page. So I'm going to go ahead and describe here what the problem is, why we didn't get those styles out there. And that's that, as you can see, there's no sources set up for each page. So once you have a separate style sheet, as we do, you can just add a source and say, you know, before we created a new file, now we just need to attach an existing one. So by doing that and then just browsing to that same styles.css file that we've been creating all this time, we can pick up all those styles. So you can see how easy that was. So we don't have to duplicate our work. We just have to tell Dreamweaver that we do indeed want all those same styles to apply to this page. I'm going to go to boards and do the same thing. Just add a source, have your Css Designer panel open there, add a source, attach, browse to our one and only style sheet. You can link or import a style sheet, by the way, and linking will be fine for our purposes here, so we'll just take that default. And we can see that if we now do a file save all, since we've changed a couple of files there, and we come back to our browser, there we go, we see all three pages now have the same style sheet intact. Now if we take a little closer look at this boards page, it's still kind of a mess in terms of how it lays out with these skateboards and all the features of them below instead of to their right. So same thing with the second one. We really would want these next to it. So what we have here is a page with some special formatting needs beyond the basic ones that work for the other pages. So we're going to come back to Dreamweaver now, and we're going to focus attention on this boards page. What we're going to do is we're going to make sure we're in live view on this boards page, and I've clicked on the first skateboard there, and you can see that that's an image, and you see the little plus sign. This allows us to add a class or an ID. It's a very handy way of adding a class or an ID. Remember maybe from an earlier video that an ID is for something that occurs once and only once, like the main content area of a page. There's only one of those on each page. But there might be a product image occurring in multiple places on the same page. In this case, it appears twice at least. So we're going to use a class to identify it because we do in fact want the same styling primarily to apply to both. So just like the same styling for all three links, the same styling for these two images pretty much is going to work for us. So I'm going to plus sign there, and then I'm going to type in, since it's a class, I will start it with a dot. So I say dot, identify that it is a class. Hashtag would do for an ID. And it's going to be a product pic. Product photo, in other words. So no spaces in there, dot product pic. Product pic. Hit enter to lock that in. It gives us some choices there. We can pretty much ignore that for now. I'm going to go directly down to the other image here in live view, click on that second skateboard, do another plus sign there, and when I do a dot now, it should give me the choice of the existing classes to choose from, so I don't have to retype it. So these are both product pics, and they can get the same kind of styling treatment. So now that I have one of these product pics chosen, doesn't really matter which one, make sure you select that, and we can go now to the selectors and do a plus sign. Actually, it was clever enough to already put it there. So I'm going to back out of this by hitting enter, selecting it, removing it, and just going with the one it set up. So by virtue of setting up the class, it kind of figures you're probably going to come over here and set up some styles for it. So it already had it there. I just didn't notice it. So now with product pic, what we want to do is we want to float that skateboard to the left. Now it's already as far left as it can go actually. What I want to do by floating it to the left is to get this text to come up to its right. So I'm going to go to the page layout stuff. I'm going to drop down below the margin and padding boxes and float left. As you can see, the main effect of that is to bring all the text up. Now, because we have, in this situation, long boards that are actually longer than the text that's sitting next to it, the second one starts here, and so they don't really start off on a very equal footing there in terms of their positioning. No worries, we'll get that fixed. But at the moment, the success of that style was to get the text to sit next to each of the boards. So that actually worked as expected, even though it looks weird at the moment. We'll get that fixed. All right, next up, what we want to do is we kind of have to set up a new class which contains not only the image but all the text, so we can separate these two a little bit better. And this is a little tricky because the selection itself starts here and ends there, and it's hard to get it in live view even though you think you might have. So I'm going to go to design view and more carefully make that selection. So I'm going to start with it actually includes the image which is in front of the G, if you remember when we first put it there. So I'm actually going to kind of reverse select it in this way. I think it works out a little easier. I can actually get that skateboard in that selection if you can. It's not easy. You might have to try a few times. There it is. It's actually easier to do this in code view if you know what you're looking for. So here's the selection that I wanted. It includes the skateboard and all the text for that skateboard, stopping before the next one and the globe. I want to set a div around this, so I'm going to go insert div. I'm going to wrap the div around that selection, and I'm going to set a class for that div, and it's going to be product info. Again, one word, product info. You don't need the dot in front of it because it has a separate class and ID text box. So product info, no spaces, wrapped around that selection. You should see a little box surrounding that selection to indicate that you did it correctly. Now we got to do the same thing here for the second one. Again, it should column all the way up, include Blub, and then also include the skateboard. Again, easier to do in design view, I've found. And now we want to do insert div, wrap around that selection, and use the same class so we can drop down and we should be able to find product info in there and choose it again, but it's not being very nice. There it is. Did it myself. Dreamweaver's not perfect. Doesn't always anticipate what you want. But we should now be able to style more easily. You can kind of see the outline of things a little more clearly and how this skateboard is coming down and overlapping with our second one. It's because it's floated, it kind of allows it to be more freeform and go outside the boxes, and we can correct for that. I want to put some more space between these two guys now, so I'm going to set a style now for the dot product info. So click anywhere in there, go to the tag selector, click on the div for product info that we just set up, and then a plus sign on the selector. We'll just accept it as is, hit enter. And now I want on the product info, I'm going to set a height. I know how tall these boards are, so I can set an appropriate height that will take care of the overlapping problem. So the height is going to be in pixels, and it's going to be set to 380. When I do that, you can see that the surrounding box is now taller than the skateboard itself, and that allows them to sit on top of one another more nicely. I also want a margin on the bottom to separate them. So while I'm at it, let's go to margin bottom and set that to 40 pixels. And you can see that margin is showing here in design view. If you're in live view, it doesn't kind of show the same way. It just kind of gives you the space without really showing you that margin. So again, you kind of have to go back and forth between live view and design view, depending upon what you're trying to look at. They're each good in their own way. All right, well, we are pretty well establishing the look we want. Notice, though, that the text is really too close to these skateboards to work well for us. And if you're carefully looking at this, you'll notice that the text for this skateboard doesn't line up with the text for this skateboard. The fact is, this image for the second skateboard is wider than the one for the first. It's just the way those images are, unfortunately. We can account for that, though, and fix the problem. If you click on the images, in the property inspector you can see their dimensions. The width of this top one is 99. The width of the second one is 120. So we've got a 21 pixel difference in the widths of these things. So we can fix that, but to do so we have to operate on this image separate from the other one. Remember, we set up a class on the two of them so we could treat them the same. Now we actually need an ID on this guy in order to treat it separately. This is the Blub Bantam skateboard. So I'm going to use that plus sign in live view on the first skateboard, and I'm going to add an ID, indicate the ID with a hashtag or pound sign, and I'll call it Bantam. That's the name of that particular board. Hit enter. And now we can go and set up a selector for it. Click the plus sign. We really don't need all that extra stuff. Actually, it looks like we got, if I just escape out of there, let's choose Bantam here, nicely set up again for us, and go from there. So on Bantam, what I want to do is set a right padding of 21 pixels. Okay, and what that should do is set up the text to line up nicely together there. And now I can go back to the product pick, and for the product pick, I can set a right margin of 30 to keep the text even further away. And let's see how that looks. So now I've got, not only do I have some space, but I have equal edge on both. So it took a little work there because of the uneven sizes of those boards, but I think I've got it now. All right, one more detail. Let's first save and test. We'll test in Chrome. It'll prompt us to save. We say yes, and now it also says, hey, some other files have changed too. You want to save them? Yeah, and that would be the style sheet. So let's take a look now at how these boards look. You can see that despite the fact that they are overlapping a little bit here originally, that problem's been solved by our styles. And I think we're getting a pretty good look throughout. Now, one thing that we do need to change is, this text kind of blends all in together. The name of the board, at least this top line, should be probably emphasized a little bit, so we'll come back to Dreamweaver and we'll try to adjust that. These are each in their own little paragraph at the beginning, so I'm going to set up a class for them, call it product title. So I'm going to do a little plus sign here in live view. The class will be dot product title, two T's next to each other there. Dot product title, and I'll do the same with this paragraph. Just kind of click into that paragraph that contains that title, plus sign on the P, pound sign, product title. Make sure both of your classes are spelled identically. Looks like I might have messed up one of those myself. I have a J in front of my class name accidentally. Fix that up there. And it produced a selector, which I will get rid of. Looks like I also have an ID instead of a class. Boy, did I screw that up in multiple ways. So should be dot product title on each of those paragraphs. So the pound product title I'll get rid of. Sorry for all that confusion there, but I have two dot product titles now. And all I want to do with that is a basic text font weight of bold. And you can see how that takes those paragraphs in each case, here and here, and just bolds them so that they stand out a little bit. Let's go to the browser and confirm that look, and we'll save everything involved there. You can do a save all before you go to the browser, or you can just try to go directly to it and get those dialog boxes. So you can see now that the text for the title has been bolded. You could make it a larger font or a different kind of font, or do other things to emphasize it. But it looks to me like we've got all our styles intact. We've solved all the problems we had on that complicated boards page, and the other more simple pages are still looking good. We've got a multi-column layout. We've got a little bit of splash of coolness up on top with the combination of our background images and our logo. So I think we accomplished our goals. A little bit of complicated CSS there, but I'd rather show you more realistic coding situations than just sugarcoat it and give you something that's so easy that it's not really worthy of ever being used. So we saw quite a number of different things in here. Hopefully it makes sense to you when you go over it. And you saw me make mistakes, so don't feel bad if you make some. Just recognize them and try to correct them. We'll end it at this point and hope to see you in the next video. Thank you.